Hello and welcome to this demo. In this demo, we are going to discuss how to set up a lab environment, a local lab environment on our laptop. So in this demo, I'm going to use Oracle VirtualBox to set up a local lab with a virtual machine, an Ubuntu virtual machine installed. It doesn't really necessarily have to be Oracle VirtualBox. You could use any virtualization technology that you're comfortable with. If you have other ideas in setting up your lab environment, maybe in your private cloud environment or on a public cloud setup, that is fine. You don't have to do this, but this is for those who do not have access to such environments and really want to set up a lab using virtual machines on their local machines or laptops. In this demo, we're going to look at how to install VirtualBox on your laptop and how to deploy an Ubuntu software on it. Okay, so we are at the download page for VirtualBox. If you go to www.virtualbox.org, you will get to this page, and this is the website for downloading Oracle VirtualBox. As you can see, Oracle VirtualBox is supported on Windows, Linux, Macintosh, and Solaris hosts. If you go to the downloads section, you will be able to see the various options for downloading and installing Oracle VirtualBox. I'm going to choose the Windows option and I'm going to click it. When I click, it gives me this option to download the executable, which is the installer. I'm going to save it in one of the local folders. It's about 100 MB. Once it's downloaded, I'm going to run the executable, and it runs through the setup wizard. In the setup wizard, I'm going to click next. And then click next to select the location. I'm going to set the default values for the options. And finally, read this warning about network interfaces. It's going to reset the network connection, which is fine. And then I'm going to click install. And it goes through the installation process and is finally finished installing. Once I click on finish, it brings up the Oracle VirtualBox Manager user interface, and this is the interface that we will be using to set up new virtual machines. If you click on new, you'll actually get to see the options available for deploying a new virtual machine. So to deploy a new virtual machine, we need an image. So we do not have an operating system with us right now, or we don't have a disk. So we can actually download a readily available operating system image from the internet. And if you go to the website osboxes.org, you can actually find various images available for various operating systems. And so this site gives you readily available images for Oracle VirtualBox or VMware based virtualization platforms. So if you go to VM images at the top and select VirtualBox images, it will take you to this page where it lists all the various flavors of operating systems available. As you can see, there are many. And for our purposes, I'm going to go with Ubuntu. So click on Ubuntu and click on VirtualBox VDI image. That will take you to the download page for Ubuntu. Under this page, scroll down to various versions of Ubuntu operating system, and I'm going to go with version 16.04. And as you can see, it has various options for VirtualBox and VMware, VirtualBox being the default, and that's what I have, so I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to go with the 64-bit version. So click on download, and it actually downloads a .7z file. So remember that this is a compressed file, .7z, and it takes about 1 GB of disk space, so be aware of that. And if you look at it, it's a .7z file, so it's a zip file, so you need to extract it to use it. So I'm going to use the 7-zip extractor, and I'm going to extract the image, and now I have the image extracted into a folder by the name Ubuntu, and under that I have a folder 64-bit under which I have the actual image file, which is with the extension .vdi. Now I could go back to my Oracle VirtualBox Manager user interface and deploy a new machine. I'm going to click on New to create a new virtual machine, and it brings up this user interface. And this is where you have to specify the name for your new virtual machine. I'm going to specify Ubuntu, and as you can see, it automatically sets the type to Linux and the version to Ubuntu 64-bit. Now, if you look at the version, you see that it automatically selected the 64-bit, which is what I wanted. But there's also a 32-bit, and as you can see, for each operating system flavors, you see a 32-bit as well as a 64-bit option. Now, in some cases, you may not see the 64-bit option, and that is because you most probably don't have the virtualization support on your system enabled. So most of the laptops have the virtualization support disabled by default, and you have to actually explicitly enable it. So in my previous courses, a lot of students have reached out to me saying that they don't see the 64-bit option, and that is really because you do not have the virtualization technology enabled on your laptop. So in order to do that, you actually need to go to the BIOS and enable it from there. So for most laptops, it's actually a BIOS setting. And if you do not know how to do that, you could simply search in Google, search enabling virtualization technology, and it'll come up with a lot of options. Put the model of your laptop, and you might see the ones specific to your laptop. In most of the cases, it's in the BIOS. It's an advanced feature in BIOS where you see the virtualization technology, and that's where you go in and enable it. So this is another. So these are some examples of how the virtualization technology option looks in the BIOS. And once you do that, when you come back and look at your this screen, you should be able to see the 64-bit option available. So I'm going to select the 64-bit Ubuntu version and go ahead. And if you look at the memory size, I'm going to set a 2 GB of memory, and then I'm going to go ahead and select the hard disk. So for this, you need to click the use an existing hard disk because we're not actually going to start with a blank hard disk. We actually have the image downloaded, so that's going to be our hard disk. Whatever we downloaded and extracted, that's going to be our hard disk. So click on browse and browse the file that you just downloaded and extracted with the extension .vdi. And it has to be a 64-bit version, so make sure you select that and then click on OK. Now it has deployed the Ubuntu image or the Ubuntu virtual machine. And before powering it up, as you can see, it's currently powered off. And before powering it up, I'd like to go into the settings page and set a few things. So specifically around network. So I'd like to enable, go to the network page and set the network type to bridged. By default, it is NAT, and I want to change that and set it to bridged adapter. And the adapter that it's going to bridge to is the my Wi-Fi router, my Wi-Fi adapter. So I'm going to bridge the network interface on the Ubuntu virtual machine to the network, the wireless network adapter on my laptop. Before powering it up, I'm just going to take a snapshot. This is something I do. I just take a snapshot whenever I can, just so in case I had to come back, I could do that. So I just took a snapshot named before initial setup, and I'm just now going to start my virtual machine. So my virtual machine is now powered up. I'm going to log in using the user osboxes.org, and the password is also osboxes.org, all lowercase. That's actually the name of the site where we downloaded the image from. And once we are in, I'm going to open up a terminal, and the first thing that I would like to do is identify the IP address of the VM. So if I run the ifconfig command, I can see that the IP address is 192.168.1.84. That's the IP that was assigned to the virtual machine by my wireless router because I bridged the network connection from the VM to my wireless router. I'm now going to try and SSH into it. So I'm going to use a terminal. The one that I'm using here is called MOBA Xterm. It's a free software. I actually kind of like it because I can do a lot of configurations on my SSH sessions with this. You don't really have to use it. You could use any SSH terminal, just like PuTTY, for example. You could simply use PuTTY to SSH into the virtual machines. I'm going to use the IP address 192.168.1.84. Before going into that, I'm just going to look at my IP address. So my laptop has an IP 192.168.1.70 on the same network. So my laptop and the virtual machine are on the same network, which is created by my Wi-Fi router. And so I should be able to really SSH into it. So I'm going to try to do that right now. I'm going to put in the IP of the host, and then the username is osboxes. I'm going to click on OK. And as you can see, it doesn't really connect. It says connection refused. So if I go back to my Ubuntu VM and see the SSH service, because this is most likely an issue with the SSH service. So I'm going to try and see if the SSH service is enabled and if it's running. I'm going to run the service SSH status command, and as you can see, it doesn't really see. It says there is no such file or directory. So the SSH service is not set up. I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to run the apt get update command to update my internal repositories, followed by the command to install SSH service on my Ubuntu VM. So I'm going to run the apt get install OpenSSH server. OpenSSH server is a package that installs SSH service on my Ubuntu VM. And as you can see, it's finished successfully. And if I now run the service SSH status command, I can see that it's active and in a running state. So that is good. I can now go back and try to restart my session. I'm going to press the R key to restart the session. And as you can see, I'm at a login prompt now. I'm going to type in the password, which is osboxes.org. And there you go. I'm logged in. I'm logged into my Ubuntu VM from my laptop using an SSH. That's it for this demo. I will see you in the next demo.